husband left me for his secretary, so my father transferred the family business to me on New Year's Eve. He left me 2 days before Christmas, right in the middle of the annual charity gala I helped organize. The champagne fountain caught the light just right, sending prisms dancing across the ballroom's vaulted ceiling. I stood back, allowing myself one moment of pride. After months of planning, the Westwood Hotel's annual holiday charity gala was a masterpiece. The crystal chandeliers adorned with subtle sprigs of mistletoe, the centerpieces of white roses and silver-dipped pine cones, and the handcrafted ice sculptures of angels that wouldn't melt until well past midnight. It was perfect, exactly as I had envisioned it. Eleanor, a board member's wife, cooed as she floated past. "You've outdone yourself this year, darling. Your design sense is truly your greatest gift." I smiled politely, though something in her tone, the way she emphasized greatest, made me feel as if my talents were being confined to a very small box. "Thank you, Mrs. Calloway," I replied, lifting my own glass in acknowledgement. The event raised almost double what we did last year. "Oh, the numbers," she said, patting my arm like I was a child who just recited the alphabet correctly. "Leave that to the men in suits, dear, including that handsome husband of yours." My eyes instinctively searched the crowd for Brett. He'd been distant lately, working late hours and bringing that intense heat home with him. He said it was the pressure of the quarter-end reports, but something felt different. Something felt wrong. I spotted him across the room, his tall frame leaning casually against the bar. He was smiling, that same crooked smile that had made me drop my portfolio during our first meeting 5 years ago. But it wasn't directed at me. It was for Jessica, his executive assistant, whose hand was resting on his forearm as she laughed at something he'd said. I should have seen it sooner. The late nights, the text messages he'd quickly hide, the way he'd stopped asking about my day. "Eleanor?" My father's voice broke through my thoughts. Conrad Westwood, hospitality mogul and patriarch of the Westwood Hotel chain, stood beside me in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. "The Henderson Group is here. They want to discuss the Dubai property." "Actually, I was thinking," I started, "maybe I could sit in on the—" "Brett's already handling it," he interrupted, checking his watch. "He's been working closely with them for months. Besides, you've got your hands full with all this." He gestured vaguely to the decorations. I felt a familiar pang, the one that said, "Design is nice, but it's not the real business." I'd heard that message my entire life, explicit or implied. "Of course," I nodded, forcing brightness into my voice. "I'll just check on the dessert station." As I walked away, I heard my father's hearty laugh as he greeted someone. "John, there you are. Brett was just telling me about your proposal." I didn't make it to the dessert station. Instead, I found myself near the bar, close enough to hear Brett and Jessica, but partially hidden by a towering floral arrangement. "Tonight," Brett was saying, his voice low. "We tell them tonight." Jessica's perfectly manicured fingers tightened on her champagne flute. "Are you sure? It's her event, Brett. Maybe we should wait until after the holidays." "I can't wait anymore," he said, and the intensity in his voice was unmistakable. It was the same voice he'd used when proposing to me 3 years ago at the opening of our Paris location. "I've already talked to Conrad about a potential restructuring. He understands ambition." Ambition, as if loving me was somehow holding him back. "Fine," Jessica sighed. "But be gentle. Eleanor is fragile." I'd been called many things throughout my life. Sensitive, artistic, even delicate. But fragile stung in a way I wasn't prepared for. Was that how everyone saw me? The soft-spoken Westwood daughter who couldn't handle hard truths. I stepped forward, clearing my throat. "Brett?" They both turned, surprise flashing across their faces like deer caught in headlights. "Eleanor," Brett recovered quickly, his CEO smile sliding into place. "The event is spectacular. Everyone's talking about it. I need to speak with you," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Now." In the quiet hallway outside the ballroom, surrounded by the hotel's signature gardenias and gilt-framed mirrors, I waited for Brett to speak first, to have the decency to say the words himself. "I think you know," he finally said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I want to hear you say it," I replied. "I'm leaving you." The words hung between us like shattered glass. Jessica and I. It wasn't planned, Eleanor. But we connected on a deeper level. She understands the business, the pressure. She's ambitious, like me. I laughed then, a short, bitter sound that surprised even me. And I'm not, because I design spaces instead of analyzing spreadsheets? That's not fair. You've never shown interest in the operation side. You've been content with your little corner of the company. My little corner that's increased our brand recognition by 40% since I took over? Brett looked genuinely surprised. How would you know that? Because I read every report, I said quietly. Because I attend every board meeting, even when I'm not invited to speak. Because this company is in my blood, Brett. Something you'll never understand. Just then, a commotion erupted from the ballroom. The double doors burst open, and there stood my father with Jessica at his side, looking flushed and triumphant. "There you are," Conrad boomed. "Brett, the Henderson Group is ready to sign. They loved your proposal for the Dubai expansion. This calls for a toast." I watched Brett's face transform, ambition eclipsing any trace of remorse he might have felt moments ago. He straightened his tie and stepped toward my father, toward his future, without so much as a backward glance. "I'll be right there," he said, his voice charged with excitement. As they disappeared back into the glittering ballroom, leaving me alone in the hallway, I realized something profound. I had spent my entire life being underestimated by my father, by Brett, even by myself. But that was about to change. I wiped a single tear from my cheek and smoothed down my dress. The charity gala would continue. The champagne would flow. And no one, not one person in that room, would see me cry. Because soft didn't mean weak. Quiet didn't mean incapable. And I was about to show them all exactly what the misjudged daughter could do. They called me soft. They said I was too gentle to lead. Even my own mother thought I should focus on painting instead of profit. The week after the gala was a blur of whispers and sideways glances. I took a personal leave that everyone knew was code for too heartbroken to function. At least that's what they thought. What I was actually doing was sitting in my apartment, surrounded by financial reports and market analyses I'd collected over the years, but never openly discussed. On Christmas morning, while families gathered around trees and shared gifts, I was reviewing occupancy trends across our 15 properties. I didn't miss the irony that Brett had always accused me of not caring enough about the family business, yet he was probably spending the holiday with Jessica at her parents' lake house, the very one he'd mentioned wanting to visit last summer. My phone rang. It was my mother. "Eleanor, darling." Her voice carried that familiar tone of concern mixed with disappointment. "It's Christmas. You should be here with family, not hiding away." "I'm not hiding," I replied, shifting papers so they wouldn't rustle and give me away. "I just needed some time." "Well, your father is concerned. He says Brett hasn't been returning his calls either." I nearly laughed. Of course that would be my father's primary concern, not his daughter's broken heart, but his protege's sudden absence. "Dad's concerned about Brett?" The words tasted bitter. "Eleanor," my mother sighed. "You know what I mean? He's worried about the Dubai project now that things have changed." Things had indeed changed. Brett had emptied his closet and his desk within 24 hours of the gala. The news had spread through the company faster than a norovirus on a cruise ship. I'd received exactly 3 sympathy bouquets, one from my assistant, one from the hotel staff, and one from my college roommate who'd seen it on Instagram before I'd had the chance to call her. "Is Dad there? I'd like to speak with him." There was a pause, then my father's gruff voice. "Eleanor, are you coming for dinner?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm calling about the Henderson Group contract." Brett didn't finalize it before he left. The silence on the other end was telling. "How would you know that?" he finally asked. "Because I called John Henderson this morning to wish him Merry Christmas. And he mentioned they're still waiting on the revised terms." Another pause. "You shouldn't be bothering our clients on holidays with business matters." "Funny, I remember you teaching Brett that personal touches on holidays showed dedication." I kept my voice level despite the knot forming in my throat. "Dad, I want to handle the Dubai project." He laughed, actually laughed, and the sound cut deeper than any of Brett's betrayals. "Eleanor, sweetheart, you're upset. This isn't the time for impulsive decisions." "It's not impulsive. I've been studying our expansion strategies for years. I know the Henderson portfolio better than Brett does." You design lobbies, Ellie, he interrupted, using my childhood nickname, the one he only pulled out when he was trying to soften a blow. Beautiful ones. I'll grant you that. But this is different. This is the big leagues. And you don't think I can handle it? I think you've just experienced a significant personal trauma, and throwing yourself into something you're not prepared for isn't the answer. The board meeting was scheduled for December 28th, 3 days after Christmas, and only 10 days after Rhett had walked out of my life. I knew about it because Margot, my father's assistant for 20 years, had called to warn me they were discussing succession planning. The subtext was clear. They were deciding who would take Brett's place, and my name wasn't on the list. I showed up anyway. The conference room fell silent when I walked in, dressed in a charcoal suit rather than my usual colorful attire. My father's expression shifted from surprise to something resembling embarrassment. Eleanor, he cleared his throat. We weren't expecting you. Clearly, I took an empty seat at the table. 8 men in nearly identical suits stared back at me. But as a Westwood, I believe I have the right to attend. Richard Klein, the longest-serving board member and my father's oldest friend, leaned forward with a sympathetic smile. Of course you do, dear. But this is a rather technical meeting. We're discussing the restructuring after Brett's departure. Perfect, I said, opening my portfolio. I have some thoughts on that. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Eleanor, my father said quietly, perhaps this isn't the best time. When would be better, Dad? After you've appointed someone else to take over the Dubai project? After you've replaced Brett with another man who sees me as nothing more than the boss's artistic daughter? Richard exchanged glances with my father. Eleanor, no one thinks of you that way. Really? I pulled out the company's last annual report and opened to a tabbed page. Page 47 mentions the creative vision of Eleanor Westwood in exactly 1 paragraph. Meanwhile, Brett's contributions get 3 full pages, despite the fact that my redesign of the San Francisco property increased revenue by 22% last year. My father shifted uncomfortably. Those are different areas of the business. Yes, I agreed. And I understand both, which is more than I can say for Brett, who couldn't tell the difference between Scandinavian minimalism and Japanese Zen if his bonus depended on it. A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled around the table. I've spent my life watching, learning, and being dismissed, I continued, my voice gaining strength. My mother once told me to focus on painting instead of profit margins because it was more suitable. Brett called me soft when I suggested we should improve employee benefits because it would reduce turnover. And you? I looked directly at my father. You never once asked if I wanted more responsibility. I thought you were happy with design, he said, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. You've never expressed interest in operations. Because every time I tried, I was patted on the head and sent back to my color swatches. I slid a folder across the table. This is my proposal for the Henderson Group. I stayed up 3 nights creating it. Before you dismiss me again, at least do me the courtesy of reading it. My father took the folder, his expression unreadable. The room remained silent as he flipped through the pages, his eyebrows occasionally rising. Finally, he looked up. This is comprehensive. I know, I said simply. You've included sustainability initiatives that weren't in the original proposal. The Hendersons are pivoting toward eco-luxury. It's mentioned in their last 2 shareholder letters, which Brett apparently never read. My father closed the folder and studied me with new eyes. Not as his soft-spoken daughter who designed pretty spaces, but as someone who might actually belong in this room. We'll review your proposal, he said finally. But Eleanor, this won't be easy. The board has already been considering other candidates. I don't expect easy, I replied. I just expect fair. As I stood to leave, Richard called after me. Eleanor, one question. Why now? Why not step up before? I paused at the door and thought about all the times I'd silenced myself, all the meetings where I'd bitten my tongue, all the years of being the quiet, creative Westwood. Because no one ever told me I could, I answered honestly. Until Brett showed me exactly what happens when you underestimate the wrong person. When the clock struck midnight, everything changed. And no one saw it coming, especially not Brett. The Empire West Hotel's rooftop ballroom glittered like a diamond against the night sky. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city skyline. all twinkling lights and promise. For 20 years, the Westwood New Year's Eve Gala had been the event in the hospitality industry, a place where deals were made, partnerships formed, and futures decided. I stepped out of the elevator in a midnight blue gown that I'd ordered 2 sizes smaller than usual. Not because I'd lost weight from heartbreak, though everyone assumed I had, but because I wanted something that made me stand taller. Something with structure. The dress wasn't soft or flowing like my usual style. It had angles and purpose. "Eleanor," Richard Klein approached immediately, champagne flute extended. "You look lovely tonight. How are you holding up?" I accepted the drink with a smile that didn't reveal too much. "Better than expected, Richard. And yours?" "Oh, you know, the usual end-of-year madness. Your father's been quite mysterious about tonight's speech. Usually, I get a preview." I sipped my champagne, letting the bubbles mask my own nervous energy. "Is that so?" The past few days had been a whirlwind. After the board meeting, my father had invited me to his home office, a sacred space I'd rarely been permitted to enter as a child. We'd talked until dawn, not as father and daughter, but as 2 business minds. I'd shown him my ideas for the Dubai property, my quiet observations about our supply chain inefficiencies, and my vision for where Westwood Hotels could go next. He'd listened, really listened, and then he'd asked me to trust him. Across the room, I spotted Brett. He'd had the audacity to bring Jessica as his date. They stood huddled with a group of executives from our Asian properties, her hand possessively wrapped around his forearm. When Brett saw me, he faltered mid-sentence. I held his gaze for 3 seconds before deliberately turning away. "Eleanor?" My mother's voice carried over the crowd. She glided toward me in a silver gown, her smile brittle around the edges. "There you are. I was beginning to worry you wouldn't come. And miss the biggest night of the year? Never." I kissed her cheek, catching the faint scent of her signature perfume. She studied my face with concern. "You seem different." "Good different or bad different? Just not yourself." I smiled. Maybe I'm finally becoming myself. Before she could respond, the lights dimmed slightly, and my father took the stage. Conrad Westwood commanded attention without effort, a skill I'd always envied, but never managed to replicate. Until now, perhaps. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed through the microphone, "welcome to the 30th Annual Westwood New Year's Eve celebration. As always, it's an honor to have you all here as we close one chapter and begin writing another." The usual pleasantries followed: gratitude to partners, highlights of the year's achievements, acknowledgement of key players. I watched Brett's expression grow increasingly smug as my father listed the successes of the Dubai negotiations. Jessica beamed beside him, already playing the role of executive's wife better than I ever had. "And now," my father continued, "I'd like to address some changes within our organization." The room hushed. Everyone knew about Brett's departure from my life, if not yet officially from the company. This was the moment they'd been waiting for, the announcement of his successor. As many of you know, in business as in life, we sometimes face unexpected turns. What defines us is not the surprise itself, but how we respond to it. Brett straightened his tie, clearly preparing himself for acknowledgement. "Over the past week, I've had the opportunity to reassess our company's direction and leadership." My father paused, scanning the room. "And I've come to realize that sometimes the greatest talents are those we fail to recognize, even when they're right in front of us." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This wasn't the standard script, which is why, effective immediately, I'm pleased to announce that Eleanor Westwood will be stepping into the role of Acting Chief Executive Officer of Westwood Hotels International. The silence was absolute. For 3 heartbeats, not a single glass clinked, not a single whisper broke the stillness. Then, from somewhere near the back, a single person began to clap. Others joined, hesitantly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. I didn't look at Brett. I didn't need to. I could feel his shock from across the room, a tangible force as powerful as my own carefully concealed surprise. My father hadn't told me about the CEO position, only that he wanted me to take on greater responsibility. "Eleanor," my father gestured toward the stage, "would you join me?" My legs carried me forward automatically. The spotlight felt hot and foreign, but not entirely unwelcome. As I took my place beside my father, I finally allowed myself to glance in Brett's direction. His face had gone completely white. Jessica's drink tilted dangerously in her hand, amber liquid sloshing over the rim. "Thank you, Dad," I said, taking the microphone. The weight of it felt right somehow. "And thank you all for your support. I know this comes as a surprise to many of you." An understatement that earned a few nervous laughs. Westwood Hotels has always been about creating experiences that make people feel valued and seen. Moving forward, that philosophy won't change. What will change is how we grow, who we partner with, and how we define success. I spoke for exactly 3 minutes, not from nervousness, but from precision. Every word had purpose. Every promise had weight. And when I finished, the applause was genuine. As I stepped down from the stage, a line formed immediately. Board members, partners, employees, all suddenly eager to speak with the new CEO. From the corner of my eye, I saw Brett making his way toward me, his expression a complex mix of anger and calculation. But before he could reach me, my father intercepted him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder and steering him away. I caught a fragment of their conversation. "Time for a different discussion, son." The countdown to midnight began, voices joining in unison as the final seconds of the year ticked away. 10, 9. "Congratulations," a voice said beside me. I turned to find Richard Klein, his expression thoughtful. "Did you know about the CEO role?" "Not until he said it." 7, 6, 5. "Are you ready for this?" I thought about all the nights I'd spent studying the business, while everyone assumed I was just sketching designs. I thought about the questions I'd asked that no one had taken seriously. I thought about the strength I'd kept hidden, even from myself. 4, 3, 2. "I've been ready my whole life," I replied. 1. As cheers erupted and confetti rained down from the ceiling, I felt something shift inside me, not a transformation, but a recognition. The person I'd always been was finally stepping into the light. And in that moment of celebration and new beginnings, I caught Brett's stunned gaze across the room and raised my champagne glass in a silent toast. To new years, to new beginnings, and to the power of being underestimated. I thought the job would be hard. It was harder, but what I didn't expect was how much I loved proving them all wrong. My first official day as CEO began at 4:30 a.m. Not because I set an alarm, but because anxiety jolted me awake with questions bouncing around my mind like pinballs. Could I really do this? Would the board respect me? Was my father making a mistake? By 5:15, I was in the office, the building still dark except for the security lights. I wanted to be there first, to feel the space as mine before anyone else arrived. At 7:30, my father's executive assistant, Margot, walked in and nearly dropped her coffee when she saw me at the desk that had been my father's for 30 years. "Ms. Westwood." "I didn't expect," she blinked rapidly. "That is, your father usually doesn't arrive until 8. "I'm not my father," I said simply. "And please, it's still Eleanor." By noon, 3 things had become clear. First, no one knew exactly how to act around me. Second, the company's financial situation was more precarious than my father had publicly admitted. And third, Brett had no intention of going quietly. "He's requesting a termination package," Margot informed me, sliding a folder across the desk. "Offering his annual bonus and stock options that would have vested next quarter." I skimmed the document, my pulse quickening with each outrageous demand. "Has legal seen this?" They recommended settling to avoid disruption. Of course they did. Brett had cultivated relationships with every department head, including Patricia Winters, our chief legal counsel. Meanwhile, I'd been designing lobbies. "Schedule a meeting with Patricia today." By the end of my first week, whispers filled the hallways. Some people called it nepotism. Others predicted I wouldn't last a month. The Dubai project investors requested a call to clarify the direction, under new leadership code for questioning whether Awan, known for design, could handle the financial complexities. But the most damaging blow came during the management meeting, when Marcus Chen, our CFO, presented the quarterly forecast. As you can see, he gestured to a graph displaying a sharp downward trend. The transition has investors concerned. Our stock dropped 12% since the announcement. "That's hardly Eleanor's fault," my father interjected from his new position as chairman. "Market fluctuations are normal during leadership changes." "With all due respect, Conrad," Marcus continued, "we've never seen a drop this significant. and the Henderson Group is expressing reservations about proceeding without Brett's involvement. Then perhaps, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the heat rising in my cheeks, we should remind the Henderson Group that Brett's involvement included overlooking their sustainability requirements and inflating potential returns. The room went silent. I've reviewed all correspondence from the past 6 months. I continued. Brett promised them 22% ROI in the first year, which our own models show is impossible unless we cut corners on materials and labor, exactly what they specifically said they wouldn't accept. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Those projections were approved by the previous leadership. By Brett, you mean? Not by my father. I opened my laptop and turned it to face the room. These are my revised projections based on actual data, not wishful thinking. 16% in year 1, 24% by year 3, with full compliance to sustainability guidelines. My father leaned forward, studying the numbers. These look solid. They are, I confirmed. I also took the liberty of calling John Henderson this morning. When I explained the discrepancies, he was concerned but appreciated the transparency. They're still on board, provided we deliver what we actually promise. After the meeting, my father waited until everyone else had filed out. That was unexpected. The call to Henderson or catching Brett's lie. Both. He studied me with new eyes. You're not handling things the way I would. My stomach tightened. Is that bad? No, he said after a moment. It's necessary. The next day, I launched the Transparency Initiative, requiring all department heads to provide unfiltered reports directly to me, bypassing the layers of management where information got sanitized. Within 2 weeks, I identified 3 major inefficiencies and 1 potential ethical breach, all issues that had been hidden or minimized during Brett's rise to power. But perhaps the most surprising discovery came when Jessica approached me in the parking garage one evening, her usual confidence replaced by nervous energy. "Do you have a minute?" she asked, glancing around as if expecting Brett to materialize from between the parked cars. "For the woman who helped destroy my marriage? I can probably spare 30 seconds. She flinched but held her ground. "I deserve that, but there's something you should know." She handed me a thumb drive. "Brett's been working on a side deal with the Zhukov Group. They want to acquire 3 of your European properties, but only if they can get them at 40% below market value." I stared at her. Why tell me this? Why not help him? Because he's not who I thought he was. She twisted her hands together. "And neither are you." That night, I stayed until midnight reviewing the files Jessica had provided. Brett had indeed been orchestrating a sale that would strip valuable assets from the company. Assets that, coincidentally, I had personally redesigned to increase their value. When I finally drove home, I found Brett waiting outside my apartment building, leaning against his Audi with the casual arrogance that had once made my heart race. "Late night?" he called as I got out of my car. "What do you want?" "Brett?" "To talk. Like reasonable adults." He pushed away from his car and approached, hands in his pockets. "This game has gone on long enough, don't you think?" "Game?" I refused to back up as he entered my personal space. "Is that what you call your attempt to sell off our Paris, Milan, and Barcelona properties to the Zhukov Group?" His smile faltered for just a second before recovering. "I see Jessica's been busy. Did she mention she was the one who suggested approaching Zhukov in the first place?" "Actually, she provided documented evidence that you initiated contact last August, when you were still my husband and supposedly loyal to this company." "The board won't back you on this, Eleanor. They're already nervous about having you in charge. One major mistake, and they'll be begging me to come back." I stepped closer, close enough to smell the expensive cologne I'd once given him as an anniversary present. "Then it's a good thing I don't make major mistakes. Everyone does eventually." His tone dropped, becoming almost intimate. "But it doesn't have to be this way. We could work together, you with your creative vision, and me with the business acumen to make it profitable." For a flicker of a moment, I saw what might have been the partnership we could have had if he'd ever seen me as an equal. "You still don't get it," I said softly. "I never needed you to make my vision profitable. I just needed you to get out of my way so I could do it myself." I walked past him toward my building. "This isn't over, Eleanor," he called after me. I turned back, the streetlight illuminating us like actors on a stage. "You're right about that. Tomorrow, I'm presenting evidence of your Zhukov negotiations to the board. The day after, I'm announcing our new sustainability initiative, the one you buried because it would affect short-term profits. And next week, I'm flying to Dubai to personally finalize the Henderson deal. His face darkened. You can't. I already am. I cut him off. It turns out I'm not the soft, fragile woman you thought you married. I'm a Westwood. And Westwoods build legacies. As I rode the elevator up to my apartment, I realized something remarkable. The fire they hadn't known I had, that I hadn't fully known I had, wasn't fueled by anger or revenge. It was fueled by finally truly believing in myself. He came into my office one last time, expecting mercy. What he got was my business card. 3 months into my role as CEO, the view from the corner office still occasionally took my breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline like a living painting, the same view my father had gazed upon for decades while building the Westwood empire. Now it was mine, along with the responsibilities, challenges, and triumphs that came with it. I was reviewing the sustainability proposal, my passion project that Brett had repeatedly shelved, when Margot's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Reynolds is here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment. My pulse quickened slightly, but not from the flutter of attraction I once would have felt. This was different. The heightened awareness of a chess player anticipating an opponent's desperate move. How does he look? I asked. A pause. Like someone who needs this meeting more than you do. I smiled. Margot had become an unexpected ally over the past months, her initial skepticism giving way to fierce loyalty once she saw how seriously I took the role. Give me 2 minutes, then send him in. I used those minutes deliberately. I closed the sustainability proposal, and instead opened the quarterly report that showed our stock had not only recovered from its initial drop, but gained an additional 7%. I removed my reading glasses and applied a fresh coat of lipstick, not for vanity, but for armor. And I moved from behind my desk to the sitting area, choosing the chair that would put the sun at my back and in his eyes. When Brett walked in, I noticed the changes immediately. His bespoke suit hung slightly looser on his frame. The confidence in his stride seemed forced rather than natural. Even his smile, once his most devastating weapon, appeared brittle around the edges. Eleanor, he said, his voice soft with practiced emotion. Thank you for seeing me. Brett. I gestured to the chair across from me. I assume this is important enough to warrant an unscheduled visit. He sat, unbuttoning his jacket with the fluid motion I'd once found so attractive. Now it just seemed performative. It is. His eyes traveled around the office, taking in the changes I'd made, the artwork I'd touring female artists, the sustainability awards already beginning to accumulate, the distinct absence of his photo that had once sat on my father's desk. The office suits you. Thank you. But I doubt you came to discuss interior design. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face before he smoothed it away. Actually, in a way, that's exactly why I'm here. To discuss how well things suit us or don't. I waited, knowing from years of marriage that Brett couldn't tolerate silence. He'd fill it, often revealing more than he intended. Jessica left, he finally said, watching me for a reaction. 2 weeks ago. I know. I kept my expression neutral. She's accepted a position with the Henderson Group. His eyebrows shot up. You recommended her? I did. I crossed my legs, enjoying his confusion. She's talented, despite her questionable personal choices. And John Henderson needed someone who understands the hotel business for their new ecotourism division. Brett leaned forward, his voice dropping to the intimate tone he'd always used when trying to win an argument. That's what I've always admired about you, Eleanor. Your capacity for forgiveness. Is that why you're here? For forgiveness? I'm here because I made a mistake. He reached for my hand, but I subtly shifted, making the movement seem natural rather than avoidant. The biggest mistake of my life. Through the window behind him, I could see clouds gathering, promising an afternoon storm. Appropriate, I thought, for this particular conversation. Which mistake would that be? I asked. Cheating on me? Undermining my position in the company? Or attempting to sell off our European properties behind my father's back? All of it. He didn't even flinch at the accusations, which told me he'd rehearsed this moment. I got caught up in ambition and lost sight of what really mattered. And what would that be? Us? He said it, with such conviction that for a split second I glimpsed the man I'd once believed in. We were good together, Eleanor. We balanced each other. My drive, your creativity, my business sense, your people skills. I almost laughed at the irony. Even in his apology, he was diminishing me, still unable to see beyond the box he'd placed me in years ago. Did Jessica suggest this reconciliation attempt? I asked, my tone conversational. Before she left, perhaps. His expression tightened. This has nothing to do with her. But it has everything to do with the Mason Group deal falling through, doesn't it? I watched realization dawn on his face. Yes, I know about that too. Your backup plan after the Zhukov situation imploded. Seems your business sense isn't quite what you thought it was. How did you… I pay attention, Brett. I always did. You just never noticed. I stood, smoothing my skirt. The board meeting last week was quite illuminating. You still have friends there, obviously. They told you about my proposed restructuring. He stood as well, abandoning the pretense of romantic reconciliation. You can't possibly handle the expansion into Asia without me. Those relationships took years to build. Relationships built on golf outings and whiskey, not actual understanding of the cultural nuances and market demands. I walked to my desk and picked up a folder. Did you know that our sole property has been operating at 60% capacity for the past 2 years? Yet you kept reporting 75% in the quarterly briefings. Minor adjustments to keep investor confidence high. Lies, I corrected, that I've had to explain to the board and our partners. Do you have any idea how much credibility we lost because you couldn't admit a property was underperforming? The storm outside had arrived, rain beginning to patter against the windows. Brett's carefully constructed facade was similarly beginning to show cracks. So that's it? Everything we built together, everything we were to each other, just thrown away? We didn't build it together, I said quietly. You climbed using my family name and Kenshin's. I designed and was kept on the sidelines. That's not fair. No, it wasn't. I moved back to my desk, deliberately putting the physical barrier between us. But life rarely is, especially for those of us who are underestimated. Eleanor, his voice cracked slightly. I still love you. I opened my desk drawer and removed a business card, crisp, heavyweight stock with my name and new title embossed in silver. I slid it across the polished surface toward him. You can reach out if you're looking to book a room, I said, echoing the words from my outline of this moment. Otherwise, I believe we're done here. He stared at the card, then at me, searching for some hint of the woman who had once forgiven his late nights, overlooked his condescension, accommodated his ambition at the expense of her own. That woman stared back, but with new eyes, eyes that had seen her own worth. This isn't who you are, he said finally, his last attempt to shake my resolve. No, I agreed. This is who I've become. As the door closed behind him, I turned to face the storm-darkened sky, watching lightning split the clouds. In its brief, brilliant flash, I caught my reflection in the glass, straight-backed, clear-eyed, and undeniably powerful. The woman I'd always been capable of becoming. I used to think legacy was something passed down. Turns out, you build it with every brave, quiet, determined step. 1 year to the day after I took over as CEO, I stood on the rooftop of our newest property, Westwood Horizon, Chicago, watching the sunset paint the skyline in shades of amber and gold. Behind me, workers were putting final touches on the space for tomorrow's grand opening, an event already being called the hospitality event of the year. Miss Westwood? My new assistant, David, approached with tablet in hand. The sustainability report is ready for your review, and your father just arrived. He's waiting in the executive suite whenever you're ready. Thank you, David. Tell him I'll be down in 10 minutes. As he walked away, I took a moment to absorb the view, not just of the city, but of how far I'd come. The past year had been the most challenging and rewarding of my life. We'd expanded into 2 new cities, launched our sustainability initiative to industry acclaim, and most importantly, rebuilt the company culture from the inside out. The elevator whispered open behind me, and I turned to find my father stepping onto the rooftop. At 68, Conrad Westwood still cut an impressive figure, though retirement had softened some of his sharper edges. I thought I'd come find you instead, he said, joining me at the railing. Some view you've chosen. Worth every penny of the additional construction costs you complained about, I teased. He chuckled, a sound that had become more frequent in recent months. I stand corrected. as I have many times this year. We stood in comfortable silence, watching the city transition from day to night. Birds glided past, heading home as office lights began twinkling on in distant buildings. "Your mother would have been proud," he said finally. "She always saw something in you that I was too blind to notice." I felt a familiar pang at the mention of my mother, gone 5 years now. What was that? That quiet strength, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. He turned to face me. I always thought leadership looked like me, loud, demanding, taking up all the oxygen in the room. I never understood that sometimes the most powerful person is the one who observes and waits for the right moment. Like when Brett left me at the charity gala, I said with a wry smile. God, what a gift that man gave us, without knowing it. My father shook his head, though I should have seen your potential long before that. Maybe, but I needed to see it in myself first. Below us, a delivery truck arrived with the final flowers for tomorrow's event. White roses, my signature touch that had once been dismissed as merely decorative but was now recognized as part of the Westwood brand identity. The irony wasn't lost on me. "I received an interesting call yesterday," my father said, changing the subject. "From Brett." I raised an eyebrow but didn't feel the jolt of emotion his name once triggered. What did he want? To invest in our new Miami project. Apparently, his ventures haven't been particularly successful lately. "And what did you tell him?" "That all investment decisions now go through you." He smiled. I might have enjoyed saying that more than I should have. We both laughed, the sound carrying across the rooftop. "You know," I said after a moment, "I used to dream about proving myself to all of you, to Brett, to the board, to you. I thought that was what would finally make me feel complete." And did it? I considered the question, thinking about the past year's journey. No. What makes me feel complete is owing I no longer need anyone's validation but my own. My father nodded slowly. That's the true measure of success. The staff had discreetly withdrawn, leaving us alone on the rooftop as stars began appearing overhead. In the distance, I could see the illuminated sign of our original Chicago property, the hotel where I'd first sketched designs as a child while sitting in the corner of my father's office. "I'm stepping down as chairman next month," he said suddenly. "Dad." He held up a hand. "It's time, Eleanor. The company is in better hands now than it's ever been." "Because of what you built," I reminded him. "No," his voice was firm. "Because of what you're building, something far better than I could have imagined." Later that evening, after my father had gone to his room, I walked through the silent, nearly finished hotel. Every corner reflected both my design aesthetic and my business strategy. Luxurious but sustainable. Impressive but welcoming. Staff members who encountered me in the halls greeted me with genuine smiles rather than the fearful deference they'd shown my father or the thinly veiled disrespect they'd sometimes displayed toward Brett. In the main lobby, I paused before the centerpiece art installation, a massive, twisting sculpture of metal and light that resembled a phoenix rising. It had been commissioned from a young artist I'd discovered during a trip to Thailand, someone else whose talent had been overlooked. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard Klein. "Board unanimously approved the employee ownership program. Congratulations." I smiled, tucking the phone away. Another piece of the legacy I was choosing to build, one where success was measured not just in profit margins, but in human impact. As I made my final rounds, I passed the wall where portraits of past company leaders hung. My father's was there, of course, commanding and serious. Soon mine would join it. The first woman, the unexpected leader, the misjudged daughter who had found her voice. But I wouldn't be portrayed behind a desk or in front of a corporate backdrop. I'd chosen to be painted in the rooftop garden of our Paris hotel, surrounded by the sustainable design elements that were becoming our new signature, with city lights glittering below and endless possibilities above. Because that was the truth I discovered. Legacy isn't just what's handed to you or what others expect you to become. Legacy is what you choose to create when you finally step into the person you were always meant to be. And mine was just beginning.